Hello and welcome to part 2 of this Fender the Twin, or Fender Twin from the 90s. You remember in part 1 we recapped this amp and sorted it all out, but we had these Chinese ruby tubes, if you remember, in this amp, which are, I'll just try and get one out of here. And these are 6L6 WGBs. Now, according to the schematic on this amp, it should have GCs. The customer has decided to have some new output tubes put in this. He wants to sell this amp when it's done, and he wants it to be right. Remember, with these tubes, we got this slight metallic noise going on intermittently with these tubes. He doesn't have the confidence to sell it with these tubes in it, so he's going to get some new ones in there. So I've got those tubes. He's bought them and dropped them off, so we'll have a look at those. So we have a quad of JJ 6L6 GCs, which are going to go in this amp. So the first thing we're going to do now, we're going to do some tests as well. So I'm going to bias this with these new tubes in on the, remember, if you remember on this amp, we've got these probes on the back, sockets there, we plug the probes in on the meter, and we could adjust the bias off these screws here. Now, if you watch part 1, you'd know that we never quite got to 80 millivolts, which is what this should be set to, and the preset travel ran out on the pot. So I don't know whether that's down to these tubes just drawing low current, or we've got a problem in there. Now, when I've biased it on this system we've got going on here, I'm also going to use the shunt method, and we're going to test that just to see how accurate that is. But the first thing we're going to do is fire up the amp, and we're going to turn the bias as cool as it can be, because when we put the new tubes in, we want to make sure that we don't run them hot. So we need to plug in, because it always works better when it's plugged in, as we all know. That seems to be a running thread with me at the moment. So if we turn on, now I've got a meter up there, and if we put that onto millivolts, you can see we've got 72 millivolts going on there. So I'm going to turn this up, I'll turn this down, there we go, and now we've only got 30 millivolts there. So we've set that at its coolest, so we'll switch off before these tubes get too hot, and then we'll have to sit and wait to take them out. So we're going to remove all 4, then we're going to put the GCs in, put the current limiter on while we fire it up, just to make sure there's no problems with the tubes, because even new tubes can have problems. And just a thing to remember when you're putting these tubes in, already octal tubes really, is to always check that the locator isn't broken off the tubes. Now, I know these are brand new, but you know, these tubes have been matched at some time, which means they've obviously been plugged into something to match them, and it's always possible that sometimes they just get broken off by accident and you just don't see that it is. So always check the locators, because if you just plug these in and the locator's broken, you don't get the pins the right way round, well, you then could end up with some problems. Now, if you remember, the 6L6 WGB had a maximum dissipation of 26 watts. So 70% of that, which is where the bias has got to be set at idle, is 18 watts. But these GCs have a dissipation of 30 watts, and so these tubes have to be set at 21.5. I'm just going to put the current limiter on, and we've got about 75 watts worth of bulbs in there, so let's plug back in again and that's it. So the bulbs are lit. Just let it settle for a minute. We've got 118 volts going into the amp now off the wall. And whenever I put new output tubes in an amp, I always just start it up on the current limiter. So we could increase the bulbs now. So let's put up to 15 out. I'll stick 100 in there. There we go, and the voltage should go up now. Plug in, see if we've got anything, and we have. That's good. It's good stuff. So that's all looking good. Let's take the 60 out and pop in another 100. And that's going up nicely now. So let's just check the current. Got 440 milliamps. Right, so if we look at the meter, you can see we've got negative 37 we've got going on there. Let's just turn up that preset. So I've got 60, I've got that up to 60 millivolts now. I'm just going to check the balance now. Well, we've gone up that far. Let's have a look. Oh, and you can see the balance is a good way off there. So I'm just going to take the balance down. Remember, we need this to be at 0. Minus. There, that'll do for, and then we'll go back to the bias. Right, we'll go up again. And there we go. So the bias preset now, the travel hasn't run out, so those tubes just don't draw enough current. But these tubes are drawing much more current. Right, let's just check the balance again. Yep, and the balance is way off again. So every time you adjust the bias, you need to go back and 0 volts, this balance. Remember, it was very difficult to get this. Oh, going the wrong way. There we go. I think that's about as close as we're going to get that. Let's go back and check the bias again. And that's at 79 now, so it has just dropped slightly, but that could just be the mains. That's close enough though. 79.5 milliamps. So you can see it's just a fluctuation on the mains. So I think we'll leave that at that. So that has now biased the amp up correctly on the using this Flirt-a-Maderge system here. Now let's see how accurate that is. Now check the bias using the shunt method, and when I first checked these tubes after we'd used this balance setting and set it to 0, I'd got 16.1 watts on the right side and 14.69 on the left. Now I've altered the balance, and now I've got 15 watts on one side and 14.3 on the other. So now we're within 0.7 watts. But if we look up at the meter there, you can see it's minus 4.517. So this system here that they've got going on, it looks like some of the components have drifted on it slightly. So I'm just going to go, and that's more, and the tubes are biased a bit low as well, so we need to we'll still need to put them, but I'm just trying to see how far out this balance actually is. So on the left, what, 2.5 and 2.6 have we got there on the left? 2.6, and on the right we now got 2.48. 2.48. So might have gone a bit too far now. Right, so I've balanced these up now at 15.8 and 15.6, so you call that's about as close as we're going to get them. So let's just see how far out this doofra is now on the back, this balance, according to these settings here. Well, that's pretty close now. If you look at that, 0.0684, so I would say that's close enough. So that is pretty accurate, really. 0.0, so 0.685 is about where that is. So that's close. It's pretty close. That's actually minus as well. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty close. So let's have a look. Let's have a look where the milliamps are. So probably not drifted a great deal, if any. 76 milliamps we're at now. .76 milliamps at 234.8 volts coming in off the wall. Wall volts makes a lot of difference. Let's just turn this up, because we are biased quite low now for these 6v6s. So it needs to be 80 millivolts. 80 millivolts. And you can see now that the balance is way off again on there, so we'll just, we know roughly where to put that now, don't we? So roughly around there, I'd say. So we'll do it some more maths, see what we've got now. And I mean, I'm just doing this this is just an experimentation, just to see how accurate this bias preset thing is on the back. That's really all we're doing this for. Right, so putting that back to roughly where it was, we've turned up the bias to 80 milliamps. The tubes are out again. Now I've got 17.3 on the right and 15.9 on the left. It's still biased quite low as well. This bias preset thing does not bias at 70%, not by a long chalk. These tubes should be around 21 watts, and the balance is off again now. So I'm just having a feel at that transformer, that power transformer, and it is a little bit warm, so I don't think we really want to be going much over that, to be fair. we need to balance them up a bit because they are now a bit out. 16.8 and 16.8. Don't get it any closer than that. That's a perfect match. So let's see what our doofra tells us now. I'd say that's pretty good, wouldn't you? So that's pretty accurate. You can't argue with that. So that is accurate. That has not drifted. The bias remains questionable though, because 80 millivolts on here is smack on 80 millivolts there, and that only gives us 16.8 watts, which is well under, and that is about 55% as opposed to 70%. That transformer is quite hot. You can touch it, but it's hot. So I think that's where we're going to leave those, because maybe that 80 milliamps is exactly where these tubes should be, to the spec of that transformer. So I'm not going to push it up to 70% because that would be quite a lot of current. So maybe that's why they've done that then, who knows. But anyway, that's just all that was, really was just a bit of an experiment to bias this amp. The tubes are perfectly matched now, and they're pretty close match anyway, the tubes. We could tell that by what we could see on the meter as well, because of course that's the other factor, is the tubes. You know, how well matched the tubes are. So the tubes are, you know, seem to be pretty well matched. I would imagine if the tubes are a mile out in match, then you're going to have, you know, maybe have problems, you know, zeroing off that. But this is a thing, you see, if you just come along and set that just set that up at 0 and then set the bias at 80 millivolts, you're just assuming that this circuitry in here is spot on, and you're also assuming that the tubes are a match set. However, and of course you never put a meter on it, and this is why I use the shunt method, because it's incredibly accurate. You're not relying on a numerous amount of components, you're just relying on 1 meter, and as long as your meter is calibrated, and we're overcritical with that, because if they'd have been a watt out, they'd have still been considered as a suitable match, really. Obviously if we was doing hi-fi, they'd have to be closer, but that was just an experiment, just to see, you know, how well matched these tubes are, and how close we could get that to 0, and that's pretty good, pretty close. So I think that's a wrap for that now. Right, so we thought we'd get blasé with the scope. There we go, no crossover distortion whatsoever, so that's that channel flat out. That's the clean channel. Let's just see what we are getting out of it. I was getting 70 watts before. Right, so flat out now, and obviously that's overdriving at that, because you can tell by the waveform. 91 watts we're getting out of it. Let's clean it up. That's not on the clean channel, that's on the crunch channel. So let's see what it is clean now. That's actually more, because the peak to peak voltage, let's just see what that is. Actually no, that's not. That's so 68 watts clean. It's about the same clean, roughly, more or less the same. Obviously if you really crank it, you'll get a considerable more, but as a clean tone we always generally go for roughly a clean tone. There we go. Little bit different there on the bottom to the top on that channel. The other one's perfect, the clean channel, but there we go. Let's just change the EQ. So there we go, I think that's a wrap. So yeah, it's certainly got a lot more power when it's cranked up now with those tubes. Not much more, but a bit. So we were getting 70 watts out of this flat out, we're getting 90, so we've got 20 watts more, so which we'd expect with these tubes. And they're a much better quality tube as well, to be fair. Right, let's get this buttoned up.